Alright, welcome to another edition of What the Fuck Happens Here in Mendham. Jeez. Anyway, I will be doing a few videos on a Benatar interview where, yes, Benatar disappoints once again. And maybe it's just this academic thing, he just can't say the magic words because he'll be imprisoned, so to speak. Okay, the Inquisition will find what he's saying unacceptable, and he will, have to go to some sort of house arrest rock pile or something. And so it just might be all this, maybe he should find some other way to evade answering the question than to actually answer it. So apparently somewhere in this interview he will say something like, I wouldn't press the red button. And it doesn't fit with the title of his book, so, he should qualify his statement about it better never to have been, and stated, well, maybe sort of, or something, because obviously it's the logical conclusion is to actually do something. If you identify the disease, you identify the cause of the problem, and you have a way of solving the problem, to say, oh, the solution is unacceptable, would be kind of disingenuous, whatever, retarded. You pick. It logically fails. Okay, it's that stupid fallacy. Anyway, so the first half of this video, first half of the conversation is kind of one built out of a lot of convoluted, complex circumstances, where you say something, you set up a circumstance that's just too unclear for you to decide. So it's like the fat man trolley question. Unless somebody tells you that the people on the ground are worth more than the fat guy, you have to be sure that the fat guy isn't going to cure cancer and that the people on the ground are, kind of thing. And if you're not sure, then what the hell? Indecision is appropriate. But if you are sure, okay. So, it's probably more words than are necessary. Anyway, so I will, indulge people who think I should talk about something else, and explain why I just couldn't give a shit about any other subject, because it doesn't matter. We don't have a functioning civilization at the moment, so that's why all other subjects are uninteresting, is because there's no point in talking about it. The two fringes are running the show, so it's either icebergs to the left of us or icebergs to the right of us. There's really not a difference between, it's just a fact. They're both, it's vote for Hitler, okay, the one that's a Hitler, the Republicans, or vote for Smittler. Liberals talking absolute nonsense. It doesn't make any sense at all, won't solve any problems, won't fix anything, just break the system as much as you possibly can, morons. So, yeah, you can't vote for either one of these idiots. So what are you gonna do? Except just watch the fiasco, the farce. So that's why I don't talk about anything, because there's nothing to do, okay? I mean, the whole system is corrupt. Every judge is an asshole and an idiot. There's not a fucking functional government employee on this planet right now. Every fucking one of them seems to be on the take and has no other interest than to harass humans for money than to do their goddamn jobs. I mean, there's just nothing to say that's positive. Not a fucking thing. There's not a glimmer of hope sparking anywhere. It's as black and bleak a circumstance as I have seen in my lifetime, okay? There's just absolutely not any good news. Except for global warming. Well, besides that catastrophe brewing, there's nothing good happening. So, fuck you people. Talk about something else. Shit. Anyway, I mean, It's just anyway. Hip hop? Yeah, I should talk about hip hop or something. Why? What? There's nothing to talk about. All right. Anyway, so on to the video and such. So it's just going to be, me trying to paraphrase the conversation is about some dopey notion that there's whatever. There's like 17 anti-natalists who think it's a better strategy to make more kids. Okay, that somehow will help anti-natalism. Okay, so the end game, whatever their end game is, I don't see. It all depends on what you think an anti-natalist is. Is anti-natalist who thinks nature is a great place. Okay, and that it would really be cool if we go back to dinosaurs. Then yeah, it's just too stupid an argument. This is why the big tent thing doesn't work, because if people actually think the nature is a kind and beautiful mother, then forget it. There's no argument. Sure, go ahead and make more humans. I'm just saying I don't know what they're possibly thinking the outcome is. If the outcome is you're going to abandon the animal kingdom to nature, then certainly keep humans around, because it's got to be better than that. I mean, it's Hitler and Smittler again. I mean, us doing nothing and nature are, if that's the choice, us being here and doing nothing, or our nature being in control, those two things are the same thing. Not a dime's worth of difference again.
Tell the truth and say, I don't think so, frankly. So they're basically saying, I can't give you the whole context. Okay.
Yeah, so I couldn't even do it in the video. Ugh.
Off easy. It's very few. Okay, and really, even they can understand that concept of but for the grace of God go I, and that they can clearly understand that they were in fact insanely lucky.
This is the wrong video. How interesting. I wonder why. All right, so this will help having the right video. Well, that's still not the right video. That's the right video. Okay, that's better. More likely to be on the subject if it's the right video.
I'd almost say it's like Sam Harris's introduction of talking about the moral landscape and saying...
All right, so I was pointing out how Benatar did do good work. I mean, it's a good book. He exposed the subject, the whole asymmetry argument, a little technical, but very... it's kind of nice to have some of that precision stuff, precision, logic and all the rest of it. So lots of good stuff. But, and he did say right in the, like I said, I remember just because it was an important thing I wanted to see in this book. And it was right in like the first 2 pages where he says, everything I'm going to say about the human condition applies to the animal condition. So he got the fact that this isn't about humans, it's about sentient life. It's about organisms that are conscious and can be tortured. That's what it's about. But he's sort of lost that now, I guess you could say a little bit. He's just afraid of it.
Versus incidental. So again, if somebody asks me, well, if we brutally kill 1,000 people...
Right, to cure malaria, I'm going to say do it. And then they could probably go up to 1 million, I mean, you could probably pay an incredibly high price, because what you're going to get from that in terms of the reduction in human misery is very high. So for very good fixes of very bad things, you can pay a very high price. But we don't fix anything by being here. There's a whole argument. So you don't pay any price at all. So all this beginning part was all about consequentialism, and also the argument of whether you're supposed to be measuring the net outcome. You don't measure how much it cost you at any one moment. You measure what is the end product. Did more people suffer or less people suffer when it was all said and done? When you finish writing the book, what actually happened? Okay, did you pay more or did you get a bargain? That's all you got to know.
Can, in a practical way, also bypass theoretical disagreements. So consequentialist arguments for natalist veganism are probably stronger or less weak, whichever way you want to put it, than non-consequentialist arguments.
So again, it just this whole idea of not recognizing that it just doesn't matter. All that matters is what was the end effect. So you measure it over the long term, the longest term imaginable. In this case, the longest term imaginable is from now till whatever. There's no longer any sentient life, and you're just saying that everything I do, like I can move my finger this way or I can move my finger that way, whichever one is least expensive over that whole term is the rational choice to make.
But I think that even those are going.
Oh, okay, I have to jump ahead a little.
Consequentialism. Benatar just basically said, I don't have much use for the term. I don't want to be pigeonholed by it. You know, I don't really play in that atmosphere.
So yeah, that's sort of, I'm of the same opinion. I mean, all of these jargon used in the conversation when it's not that complicated. I mean, there's nothing other than this idea of making an argument from net effect. I mean, if you're not going to judge the net effect, there's no point in judging because that's the only thing that could possibly matter. So whether you call that consequentialism, see that the catch is they'll still not say that's consequentialism because they're still going to say that there's some aspect of it where you're trying to separate what you paid for it, like going to medical school, from the fact that you became a doctor. Well, you can never separate that you have to go to medical school to become a doctor. So you have to pay something, you have to do something. It's a high bar to jump. All of those kind of things. You can't separate that from the fact, so you measure that as the net part of the net cost. That's what it requires, a sacrifice of time to become a piano player or something. It's not for free. Yeah, you know it's not for free, but you're saying, well, it's worth it in some cases. In some cases, maybe not.
And now the guy's just being, go ahead. He's going to just sit there and belligerently.
So that's the sort of interviewer's fault, is that he had this bent in the whole interview, where the subject is the fringe movement inside of antinatalism. Let's talk about the fringes again. Like somehow the fringes are in control. The 14 people should control the whole movement. It's just ridiculous.
Death. Okay, my horrible death, being crucified on a cross.
So I was just pointing out that, look, if the facts point that way, you don't have a choice. And there's lots of unpleasant facts. So I point out how nobody wants to put their dog to sleep or their cat. Nobody wants to do these hard things. It's all unpleasant and nasty, but you're stuck with it. There's nothing there's nothing you can do about it except having to make your best effort not to fuck it up, not to do it wrong because of some emotional problem or some weakness you have. You have to figure what's the right thing, and then you have to plot a course in that direction.
The whole thing would somehow make it all right, to save billions of animals.
Right. So go ahead, torture me if you can prove, okay, with some sort of paper that Gary being squished to death in a garbage compactor will, save millions of people horrible grief, prevent an earthquake, whatever. Then yeah, what am I supposed to say? Okay, yeah, you got to logically do that. Okay, I'm not worth another one human being tortured, let alone if I can, if you can make that big a profit out of the action, you have to argue, you have to do the action, no matter how unpleasant it is. Sorry, just a fact. Maybe Smallpox Mary was really nice and friendly and happy and fun person, but if she's killing people, well, you got to kill her first. and killing them badly, I mean.
Well, so a version of your argument can be advanced either by a natalist vegan or a natalist non-vegan. Now, one version of the argument would just say, even to the natalist vegans, well, if you're really interested in maximizing human damage to the environment and thereby contributing to the extinction of wild animal species, why don't you in fact eat meat? Because that will increase the demand for...
So all of these convoluted, arguments about how to destroy human civilization versus, destroy the animal kingdom in some sort of, or degrade it, let's just say. Degrading nature isn't the solution. So you've got to sterilize it. So if you're just going to harm the animals more, it's almost like I'd make the feral cat argument. Again, that you're not doing the feral cats any favor by spending all of the money, okay, on veterinary bills to cut their nuts off and cut their ovaries out and throw them back on the street. That's not going to solve the problem. And it's not even close to a cure, and it's really, really expensive Band-Aids. And it's cruel on top of it. The animals they're not saying thank you for doing surgery on me. It's not happening, okay? The cats and the dogs don't need to be rescued. What they need is not to wake up. Or they need to go to sleep some night and not wake up the next morning. Then you're doing them a favor. All right, but dragging them along, pretending they're not going to die someday horribly because you prevented it once, no, that's not smart. It's not true consequentialism.
Animal species to proliferate because some animals have been...
Right, so this is the problem with these kind of...
Okay, so just pointing out too complex a scenario about whether you're trying to destroy human civilization and give the world back to the animals, or whether you're trying to destroy human civilization and blow the whole planet up, or and my whole argument is if this is going to get done, it has to be done on purpose. So human civilization has to be intact. You have to be able to take all of your resources and do it well. So it's like putting an animal to sleep. It has to be done sort of carefully. You can't just sloppily, I would argue that, yes, you're probably being more humane if you just lop something's head off. But I just mean there's all kinds of ways to kill something. And you don't kill it the slowest, hardest way. You do it the quickest, efficient way. And the fact is if you're going to do this job of preventing consciousness from waking up in the war over and over and over, being a soldier in some insect battle, then you're going to have to do it on purpose. Because if you're trying to do it as a side effect of some other catastrophe you've created, it's not going to work because it finds a way. It's going to grow back. And you won't have accomplished anything but tormented a bunch of it on the way down, declining its population through a degrade in its quality of life, and then having it re-emerge with a degrade in its quality of life. You won't have enhanced anything. You'll just have caused a lot of wasted time and suffering. It's got to be done right or, no point.
Then it's pretty imbecilic to say your solution costs too much. So if you can secretly and privately destroy a person with a terrible blood footprint.
So this whole thing about, look, it's very nice to have a social contract. It's very nice to have a civilization, all that kind of crap. But the fact is, if you know somebody is going to, let's say, do something horrible, that they have a vial of anthrax and they're going to let it loose or some kind of thing, and you can't get anybody to do anything about it. The government won't stop them, and this won't happen because they don't have proof, and blah blah blah. But you know it. You're inside, and you know the guy's making a bomb and he's going to blow up the whatever building, and you shoot him in the head. Okay, it's against the law. You murdered him. Well, bullshit. Okay. you did a good deed. Everybody should be grateful. So the fact that there's some sort of law against it isn't going to mean anything when you have the choice to either save them or not save them. Okay, you're not going to worry about the law when it comes to some act that's got to be done, like shooting Hitler. If you're a German and and you know what Hitler's up to, and you've been to one of the camps or some other kind of bullshit, and you decide to stick a fork in his eye, you haven't broken the law, in any rational sense of the law.
Neurons are dangerous. The more neurons you have, the more that can be devoted to this function of awareness of.
Yeah. So then talking about the biosphere, and it's such a difficult subject because it really it doesn't have much to do with how bad the problem is, but there's a certain truth to the fact that this complex sentience of being a mammal, okay, and having tens of billions of neurons versus organisms that have tens of millions. But there can be a quite, I think, reasonable argument made that sentience, the first ouch, happened with only a few million, okay, neurons. So it's a really old function, and it does exist in even insects. And it might even be worse, so we don't know, okay? So we can't sample it, and so we can't say. But we certainly can have a sense that the more sophisticated the intelligence gets, the more it can play with that sensation. Whether that makes any difference or not, I can't say. But the argument's there to be had, and all it just means is it's just going from a category 400 hurricane to a category 900. I mean, it's still, when the average is 4, or 3. It still doesn't change the argument any in terms of how bad things are. It just means you're just saying it's not bad times a billion, it's bad times a million. So it's a little bit better. Maybe. But it's a real maybe subject.
And then another species is...
I mean, if I could actually prove, if there was some way to actually prove to people that insects actually do feel, and the anguish is real, the pain is real, that it happens in the universe, it's just as rich as the pains you experience. I wonder how many people would say, okay, now that's too much. Okay, now I get it. We can't allow that to be happening. I mean, it's just the carnage is insane. The amount of torture is insane. It's not acceptable. It isn't pretty enough. Nature, it just isn't. There's just no way to call this a good thing. It's just too horrible. All these organisms eating each other alive, and all of this completely unacceptable circumstance. If they were my brothers, I would stop the system to stop it from torturing my brother. I mean, duh.
So I think that's a pretty solid argument that we eradicate enough of it that we diminish how much living stuff is in the ocean per second.
Right. So to me, it's just trying to find that answer. Is have you actually diminished how much suffering takes place? But again, that argument gets complicated because, with the fishery argument, because you could argue that although we've reduced the bulk of life in the ocean by, you could argue, weight, the fact is that we're shortening the lifespan, so we're increasing the number of life and death cycles. So in that sense, we have failed because now they'll have to die more times. So even though there's less life, it's dying more often. So that's no good.
Okay, there'd be more of it in the ocean if we...
Okay, so let's jump ahead.
It's just unfathomable. And again, to think about it in terms of, the only good news is animals over time had cooled the planet So the planet's getting colder and colder. And
so that's a sort of an interesting argument about the fact that what we did to this natural system, in a sense, was over time the biosphere was cooling, and that meant less life. So it was, we're moving away from the Jurassic Park, and then the band of where life could, the conditions were tolerable was getting smaller and smaller, and you could argue that maybe it was going to end in a carbon death. I mean, it's a possible scenario that so much of the carbon in the active biosphere gets secreted into the ground that the planet stays really cold, and it turns to Mars all on its own. That it might be heading that way if we didn't, show up to interfere and throw us millions of years backwards. I mean, it took 300 million years to secrete the carbon, and it's only taken us 100 to release whatever, let's just say 10% of it.
Colder because the planet is sequestering a bunch of carbon, and we broke that cycle. So eventually the planet would have gotten pretty cold merely because of all the carbon we had subtracted from the active biosphere.
Right, through the inefficient death process. So every time something dies, it's a little bit inefficient in the sense that it takes some of the carbon and sinks it, below the surface. So it is kind of ironic that over time, this carbon-based biosphere was going to run out of carbon, the carbon that it needs in the cycle. It was going to stop cycling.
It's broken, okay? It's a broken DNA molecule. It's not,
All right, that was another it's a difficult subject, but I mean, this argument that everything is sacred or any of that kind of crap, and these forms, I'm sort of making the argument that the whole biosphere could run with like 4 organisms. It might be able to run with just one, that actually just reproduces itself, raises its own children like pigs, and then slaughters them and eats them. But it's just about the growing process. It's just about converting, nutrients in the ground into nutrients it can eat. So all it needs is one kind of plant on Earth, and then one kind of organism that eats the plant. And as long as the plant eats the waste of the bigger thing, and then everything will work out just fine. They'll just exploit the fuck out of each other forever. So in a sense, you could have a biosphere made out of almost very few fundamental, basic types of machine. So this idea that somehow diversity matters, and that the whole system will fall apart if you, eradicate a few million species, it won't fall apart. It'll find a way, blah, blah, blah.
Stuff never really get really old anymore, you could argue. So in some sense, that's a negative, because you're causing more deaths to actually take place.
Yeah, so I already made that argument. Okay, thank you.
Number of fish in the ocean, or the amount we can pull out of the ocean, then we just start farming and
yeah, right. So you gotta, there's no point in somebody making an argument that we've accomplished something by taking some fish out of the ocean, when you could make the counter argument, and we put them in a bunch of ponds somewhere, so the total mass hasn't been reduced and all this kind of stuff. So you can't, it's hard to make the arguments without having, real numbers for any of that stuff.
More mayhem and more human destruction.
It's like the rainforest. You knock down the rainforest and you get rid of a bunch of bugs and reptiles and a few mammals, but not too many. And you replace them with turkey farm or whatever chicken and machine thingy. And then you could talk about, now you've created a whole bunch of higher order animals, that are going to be tortured on the same amount of territory. So it's really hard to make these arguments that you're sterilizing the planet by doing any of this stuff. And again, for what end? It doesn't make any difference if in the end you're not going to fix anything. You're just going to break what exists and then return it to Jurassic Park. If you're going to give it back, if you're going to give control back to nature, there's no point. That's you know, I don't know what else. I don't know. I can't describe something worse than Hitler, right? As a cliche. So, but that's as low as you can go. Is handing the reins to nature, because it's as brutal and nasty as it gets. Really can't get any worse. Then.
All right.
Up the end. Okay. So, so not a totally worthless video. Probably the second half will be more interesting when Benatar does touch on the solution kind of arguments, the real solution arguments. Should we put, you know, consciousness humanely to sleep? Is it broken enough and in too horrible a condition to accept that it's going to stay that way? And do we do the right thing and put it out of its misery? Blah 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 blah. Give it the graceful exit thing, and it's not just for humanity. All life on Earth needs to gracefully exit out of being slaves to DNA molecule fun. You know, it's not fun, and the waste is you know, words just don't do. I mean, you can't place words on all of the this unimaginable amount of horror that's taken place. You know, you can't even imagine the battlefields of the Civil War, you know, and try to actually, you know, acknowledge, you know, how many people slowly died in some horrible way, you know, or the medieval wars, or any of it. You can't fully appreciate one of those little instances, let alone realize that there's billions of them. You know, that it happens at the depth of torture, the amount of torture, you know, that takes place on this planet, you know, per second is it's unimaginable. And then if you try to imagine how much you're worth, or I'm worth, or conversation is worth, or, you know, the video that got the most views this week, you know, is that video worth killing a rabbit? I don't think so. It's not worth any of it. It's not worth any of the brutal, hard facts of life. So anyway, that's the only subject that matters, is having people acknowledge that they can't really explain what our presence here is accomplishing, beyond providing the opportunity to torture sentient organisms, because the rest of what we're doing is fucking silly. Besides being tortured, everything else we do is just fucking silly. It's just, we don't produce anything but silly shit. Alright, so till the next time and such. Yeah, that's probably enough. Alright, anyway, so I'll try to get to 3 or 4 other videos this week, blah blah blah, and such. And yeah, I think that's it.